The massive alien ship Eternal Judgment floated in the darkness between stars. Its hull stretched for miles, covered in weapons that could destroy entire planets. Inside the ship's command center, Ambassador Zethkar stood before a glowing communication device. His scaled hands moved across the controls with practiced ease. Zethkar was proud of this moment. For too long, the humans had been allowed to exist in their tiny corner of space. The 7 great species of the galaxy had been patient. They had honored the old agreement for thousands of years, but now things would change. "Open the quantum cast to Earth," Zethkar commanded. His voice echoed through the command center. Other aliens stopped their work to watch. This was history in the making. The communication device hummed to life. A beam of energy shot across space faster than light itself. In seconds, it would reach the human world called Earth. Zethkar straightened his ceremonial robes and cleared his throat. "Humans of Earth," he began, his voice carrying the weight of authority. "I am Ambassador Zethkar of the Viridian Coalition. I speak for the hegemony of 7, the rightful rulers of this galaxy." He paused, letting his words sink in. On distant Earth, he knew humans were scrambling to receive his message. They probably thought this was some kind of greeting or trade offer. How wrong they were. For 3,500 years, our peoples have lived under a sacred truce. You have remained in your solar system. We have allowed you to exist in peace. But times change, and so must old agreements. Zethkar's eyes gleamed with satisfaction. He had practiced this speech many times. Every word was chosen to strike fear into human hearts. The Hegemony Council has voted. The truce has ended. You have exactly 72 standard hours to surrender your world completely. Dismantle all military ships. Destroy all weapons. Prepare your people for transport to work colonies. He gestured to his aide, who activated a holographic display. It showed the massive fleet gathering just outside human space. 50,000 ships from 7 different species, each one capable of destroying human cities with ease. This is your only warning. If you refuse, the combined fleets of the hegemony will turn your world to ash. Your species will become extinct. Your sun will be darkened. Nothing will remain of humanity but dust and memory. Zethkar smiled, showing rows of sharp teeth. Choose wisely, humans. You have seen what happens to species that defy us. The Karathi thought they were strong. The Bandari believed their technology could save them. The Xerons trusted in their ancient gods. All of them learned the truth too late. The ambassador leaned closer to the communication device. "We have conquered 1,000 worlds. We have ended the dreams of countless species. You are nothing special. You are not the first to face this choice, and you will not be the last." Meanwhile, on Earth, the message was being received in a conference room in Geneva. The Global Defense Council was having their monthly meeting when the alien transmission began. Admiral Sarah Chen, humanity's chief military coordinator, sat at the head of the table. Around her, representatives from every nation on Earth watched the holographic display with interest. When Zethkar began speaking, the room fell silent. The translation software worked quickly, turning his alien words into dozens of human languages. Everyone understood perfectly what was happening. As the alien ambassador continued his threat, something unexpected happened. Admiral Chen began to smile. Then she started to chuckle. The chuckle became a laugh. Soon she was laughing so hard that tears formed in her eyes. The other council members looked confused at first. Then one by one they began to laugh too. General Morrison from North America was the first to join in. Then Dr. Yamamoto from the Asian Federation. Within minutes, the entire room was filled with laughter. Back on the Eternal Judgment, Zethkar finished his speech and waited for a response. The quantum cast was still active, so he could hear what was happening on Earth. The sound that came back confused him greatly. It sounded like laughter. "What is that noise?" asked his aide, a young Viridian named Krex. I believe they are laughing," Zethkar replied, his confidence shaking slightly. "Laughing? But we just threatened to destroy their world." "Perhaps it is some kind of madness," Zethkar suggested. "Some species break mentally when faced with overwhelming force." On Earth, Admiral Chen wiped the tears from her eyes and stood up. She walked to the communication device, still smiling widely. The other council members had mostly stopped laughing, but grins remained on their faces. "Well," Chen said, her voice calm and friendly, "this is interesting timing." She looked around the room at her colleagues. "Should we tell them, or should we let it be a surprise?" General Morrison was still chuckling. "Oh, let it be a surprise. They've waited this long." Dr. Yamamoto nodded in agreement. It would be rude to spoil their big moment. Admiral Chen turned back to the communication device. She knew the aliens were still listening. She could almost imagine their confusion. "Ambassador Zethkar," she said politely, "thank you for the warning. We appreciate you letting us know about your plans. It's very considerate of you." She paused, her smile growing wider. "Just one quick question, though. Did anyone on your council actually read the historical files about the last time we met?" The Admiral reached over to her desk and pressed a small red button. Throughout Earth and on hidden bases throughout the solar system, lights began to flash. Alarms sounded briefly, then stopped. It was not a sound of panic. It was the sound of a machine waking up after a long sleep. "Anyway," Chen continued, "we should probably get started on preparations. 72 hours isn't very long after all." She looked directly into the communication device as if she could see Zethkar through it. "We'll see you soon, Ambassador. Thanks again for the heads up." Admiral Chen reached over and activated Protocol Lazarus. It was a protocol that had been waiting for 3,500 years to be used. Computer systems throughout human space came online. Ships that had been sleeping in the darkness began to wake up. Weapons that had been carefully maintained but never fired started their activation sequences. On the Eternal Judgment, Zethkar stared at the communication device in confusion. The human had sounded almost grateful, and what was this about historical files? "Sir," his aide Krex said nervously, "should we check the old records?" "What old records?" Zethkar snapped. "We are the ones with the historical knowledge. We are the ones who have ruled this galaxy for millennia. What could some primitive humans possibly know that we do not?" But even as he said it, doubt crept into his mind. The human admiral had sounded so confident, so amused. It was not the response he had expected. "Prepare the fleet," Zethkar ordered. "In 72 hours we move to human space. This will be over quickly." On Earth, Admiral Chen closed the communication channel and turned to face the Global Defense Council. The laughter had stopped, but the smiles remained. "Well, ladies and gentlemen," she said calmly, "it looks like our vacation is over." She walked to the window and looked up at the stars. Somewhere out there, an alien fleet was preparing to destroy humanity. They had no idea what they were really about to face. "After all these years of waiting," Chen murmured, "they finally decided to come and play." The war was about to begin, but only one side knew what that really meant. Deep in the archives of the Viridian homeworld, historian Velthara worked alone in the ancient data vaults. The old records were stored here, layer upon layer of galactic history going back thousands of years. Most of the files were never accessed anymore. The current leaders preferred to focus on the present and future, not dusty old stories. But something about the human response troubled Velthara. She had heard the recording of their laughter, seen the confident way their admiral had spoken. It didn't match what everyone knew about humans. According to common knowledge, they were a young species, barely capable of space travel, confined to one small system. So why had they seemed so unworried? Velthara's 6 fingers moved across the holographic interface, searching through files that hadn't been opened in centuries. Most records about humans were brief. First contact, the quick war, their surrender and agreement to stay in their solar system, simple and clear. But as she dug deeper, she found older files, classified files that were marked with warning symbols she barely recognized. The first file that caught her attention was labeled Species Analysis. Homo sapiens classified maximum, security. She opened it with her historian's clearance and began to read. Her eyes widened as she absorbed the information. "Impossible," she whispered. "According to this file, humans hadn't been confined to their solar system because they were weak. They had been asked to stay there because they were too dangerous to let loose in the galaxy." Velthara opened another file, then another. Each one told a story that was completely different from what she had learned in school. The humans hadn't been primitive when they first met the galactic community. They had already colonized several star systems using their own technology. The war that followed first contact hadn't been the quick victory that history books described. It had been 18 months of terror. She found battle reports that made her blood run cold. The 7th Fleet had encountered a small human military group near a place called Proxima Centauri. The humans had been outnumbered 1,000 to 1. By all logic, they should have been destroyed in minutes. Instead, they had fought for 6 hours. When the battle was over, the 7th Fleet was completely gone. Not one ship survived. The humans had somehow turned the fleet's own weapons against them. They had learned how to use Viridian technology during the middle of the battle. Velthara read report after report, each one more disturbing than the last. Humans didn't just fight, they adapted. They learned from every encounter, became stronger with each battle. They found weaknesses that the galactic species didn't even know they had. The Corvani Empire had sent their best generals against a human colony on the edge of their space. The humans had no chance, the report said. The Corvani had superior numbers, better technology, thousands of years of military experience. The human colony had held out for 3 weeks. When reinforcements finally arrived, they found the Corvani generals' ships floating empty in space. The humans had somehow convinced the entire enemy fleet to surrender without firing a shot. They had used psychological warfare that the Corvani couldn't even understand. But the most frightening reports came from the end of the war. 3 entire species had simply disappeared, not destroyed in battle, not conquered. They had packed up their entire civilizations and fled beyond the edge of the galaxy, leaving behind worlds they had lived on for millions of years. Velthara found their final messages in the archives. The Bendari Collective had sent one last transmission before they left. We cannot coexist with a species that learns this fast. Every day they grow stronger. Every encounter teaches them more. If we stay, they will become us, but better. The Xerons had been even more direct. They do not conquer worlds. They conquer minds. They understand us better than we understand ourselves. We leave now, while we still can. As Velthara read deeper into the files, she discovered the truth about the truce. It hadn't been imposed on humanity as a punishment. It had been offered as a deal. She found the actual treaty documents, signed by representatives of all 7 species and the human government. The terms were clear. Humanity would voluntarily restrict themselves to their solar system. In exchange, the galactic community would leave them alone and provide them with certain technologies to help their development. The treaty had one more clause that made Velthara's hands shake as she read it. This agreement remains in effect until such time as the galactic community chooses to terminate it. Upon termination, all previous restrictions are void. At the bottom of the treaty, in small text, was a note from the human negotiator. We understand your concerns about our expansion. We agree to this arrangement. We will use this time wisely. Velthara searched for more recent files about human activity during the truce period. What she found terrified her more than all the battle reports combined. For 3,500 years, humans had been watching. Their primitive exploration probes had been traveling throughout the galaxy, mapping every world, every trade route, every military installation. The galactic community had ignored them, thinking they were simple scientific instruments. But the probes had been recording everything. Learning about every species, every technology, every weakness. They had been preparing. The files showed human activity on dozens of worlds. Not as conquerors, but as observers. Human agents had been living among other species for centuries, studying their cultures, their technologies, their military strategies. They had been invisible, blending in perfectly with local populations. Some of the photos in the files showed humans who had been living on Viridian worlds for over 200 years. They had jobs, families, friends among the local population. No one had suspected they were anything other than immigrants from distant colonies. Velthara found financial records showing human companies that had been operating throughout the galaxy for hundreds of years. They had been involved in the construction of space stations, the development of new technologies, even the design of military ships. Humans had helped build the very fleets that were now preparing to attack Earth. The final file Velthara opened was labeled Current Human Technological Assessment. It was only 3 months old. She opened it with trembling fingers. The report was written by the galaxy's top scientists after analyzing some human trade goods. Their conclusion was simple and terrifying. Human technology was now at least 500 years ahead of the most advanced galactic species. The simple devices they traded with other worlds contained computing power that surpassed the best galactic supercomputers. Their basic metals were stronger than the most advanced military armor. Even their civilian spacecraft used propulsion systems that made military vessels look like toys. Velthara closed the files and sat back in her chair. Everything made sense now. The human admiral's laughter, her confidence, her casual mention of historical files. The humans had been waiting for this moment for 3,500 years. She reached for her communication device with shaking hands. She had to warn someone, had to tell the fleet commanders what they were really about to face. But as she activated the device, she realized something that made her blood freeze. It was too late. The fleet had already left for human space. Beltara looked at the ancient files scattered around her workstation. The truth had been here all along, buried in archives that no one bothered to read. The galactic leaders had convinced themselves that they were the victors in the ancient war. They had told themselves that humans were primitive and weak. They had believed their own lies for so long that they had forgotten the truth. Now they were about to remember why their ancestors had been so afraid. Beltara tried to send a warning message to the fleet, but her security clearance wasn't high enough for military communications during wartime. She could only sit in her archive chamber, surrounded by the evidence of humanity's true nature, and wait for news from the front. She had a feeling that news would not be good for the hegemony. Outside her window, the first reports were already starting to come in from the edge of human space. The fleet had arrived and was preparing to attack. Everything was going according to plan, except for one small detail that no one had expected. The humans were ready for them. Fleet Admiral Vorthak the Inevitable stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching the human solar system appear on his screens. Behind him, 50,000 ships from 7 different species waited for his command. It was the largest military force ever assembled in galactic history. Vorthak had earned his title through 300 years of successful conquests. He had never lost a battle, never faced an enemy that could stand against his tactical genius. Entire species had surrendered just upon hearing his name. "Status report," he commanded. "All fleets in position, Admiral," reported his tactical officer. "We are at the edge of the human system." "No resistance detected," Vorthak smiled. This would be easier than he had expected. The humans hadn't even sent ships to meet them. Their home system looked completely undefended. "Begin scanning for human military assets," Vorthak ordered. "Locate their main fleet." The scanning officer worked at his console for several minutes, then looked up with confusion. "Sir, I'm not detecting any significant military presence. A few small patrol ships around their outer planets. Some space stations that appear to be research facilities. Nothing that could threaten our forces." "Are you certain?" Vorthak asked. "Scan again." The officer scanned the system 3 more times. Each scan showed the same result. The human solar system appeared to be almost defenseless. "Perhaps they are hiding behind their planets," suggested the tactical officer, "or in their asteroid belt." "Then we will flush them out," Vorthak declared. "All ships advance into the system. Battle formation. Prepare to engage any human forces." The massive fleet began moving forward, their engines lighting up space with brilliant energy. 50,000 ships of war, armed with weapons that could crack planets and shields that could withstand the heat of stars. As they crossed into the human system, Vorthak felt a moment of satisfaction. Soon this would all be over. The humans would surrender or be destroyed. Either way, the galaxy would learn once again why the hegemony was supreme. "Sir," the communication officer called out, "we're receiving a transmission from the human homeworld." "Put it on the main screen," Vorthak ordered. The face of Admiral Sarah Chen appeared on the display. She was sitting in what looked like a comfortable office, drinking something from a small cup. She looked completely relaxed, as if she was having a casual conversation with friends instead of facing the largest invasion force in galactic history. "Hello there," Chen said cheerfully. "I'm Admiral Chen of the Earth Defense Forces. I wanted to personally welcome you to our solar system." Vorthak stared at her in disbelief. This human was greeting them like guests instead of invaders. "I hope your journey wasn't too difficult," Chen continued. "Traveling with 50,000 ships must be quite complicated. All that coordination, all those supply lines. Very impressive." "Human," Vorthak interrupted. "You will surrender immediately or we will destroy your world." Chen tilted her head slightly, as if considering his words. "That's an interesting offer, Admiral Vorthak. May I call you Admiral? Or do you prefer the Inevitable?" The fact that she knew his title surprised Vorthak, but he pushed the thought aside. "You will address me as Fleet Admiral, and you will surrender now." "Well, Fleet Admiral," Chen said, still smiling, "I'm afraid we're going to have to decline your surrender offer. But I do have a counterproposal." She leaned forward slightly. "Why don't you surrender to us instead?" The bridge of Vorthak's flagship fell completely silent. Several officers looked at each other in confusion. Had this human just asked them to surrender? "You are either insane or incredibly stupid," Vorthak snarled. "You face 50,000 ships with weapons that can destroy planets. You have nothing that can stand against us. That's what your sensors are telling you," Chen asked, looking genuinely curious. "Interesting. You might want to scan again." "We have scanned multiple times," the tactical officer reported. "The system is nearly defenseless." Chen nodded thoughtfully. "Yes, I suppose it would look that way if you're using standard scanning technology. The thing is, Fleet Admiral, we've had 3,500 years to improve on standard technology." She reached forward and pressed something on her desk. "Computer, disengage stealth systems." Suddenly, Vorthak's tactical display exploded with new contacts. Ships appeared all around his fleet, ships that had been completely invisible moments before. They weren't just hiding behind planets or asteroids. They were right there in open space, somehow invisible to all sensors. But these weren't the primitive vessels Vorthak had expected. The human ships were sleek and advanced, their hulls gleaming with energy fields he didn't recognize. They moved with impossible grace as if the laws of physics didn't apply to them. "What? How?" Vorthak stammered. "Oh, and Fleet Admiral?" Chen said, her voice still friendly. "You might want to check your engines." Vorthak spun around to his engineering officer. "Report." The engineering officer's face was pale. "Sir, our main engines are offline. All of them. The entire fleet's engines have been disabled." "Impossible. Our ships were running perfectly moments ago." "I don't understand it, sir. The engines aren't damaged. They just stopped. All 50,000 ships at exactly the same moment." On the screen, Admiral Chen took another sip from her cup. "Sorry about that. We needed to make sure you couldn't leave until we finished our conversation. Don't worry, your engines aren't damaged. We just convinced them to take a little break." Vorthak's mind reeled. Somehow the humans had disabled 50,000 ships simultaneously without firing a shot. His tactical officer was frantically trying to find some explanation. But the sensors showed no energy weapons, no boarding parties, no external interference of any kind. "How are you doing this?" Vorthak demanded. "Trade secret," Chen replied. "But I'll give you a hint. Remember when your people gave us some technology samples as part of the Truce agreement? We found them very educational." She stood up from her desk and walked toward the camera. "The thing is, Fleet Admiral, every piece of technology you've ever shared with anyone in this galaxy has eventually made its way to us. We've had centuries to study it, improve it, and figure out how to make it do things you never imagined." More human ships continued to decloak around the alien fleet. They came from every direction, above and below, surrounding the massive invasion force completely. Vorthak counted thousands of them, but somehow his sensors still couldn't get accurate readings on their numbers or capabilities. "Your shields," Chen continued, "are based on a harmonic frequency principle that we learned about 400 years ago. Your engines use a quantum field manipulation system that we reverse-engineered 3 centuries ago. Your weapons rely on energy patterns that we've been studying since before your great-great-grandfathers were born." She smiled wider. "We know your technology better than you do, Fleet Admiral. We've improved on it, refined it, and made it obsolete. What you're seeing around you isn't primitive human engineering. It's what your own technology looks like after 3,500 years of human innovation." Vorthak looked around his bridge at his crew. They were the finest officers from 7 different species, trained in academies that had produced military leaders for thousands of years. But every one of them looked as confused and helpless as he felt. "This is impossible," he said quietly. "No," Chen replied. "This is what happens when you give a species like humanity 3,500 years to prepare for your return visit." She pressed another button on her desk. Throughout the alien fleet, lights began flickering. Computer systems started displaying human text instead of alien languages. Weapon systems turned themselves off and refused to turn back on. "Your ships are now under our control," Chen announced. "Don't worry, we're not going to hurt anyone. But we thought it would be safer if your weapons weren't pointed at our planets while we finish our chat." Vorthak slumped in his command chair. In 300 years of military service, he had never felt so completely outmatched. His fleet of 50,000 ships had been neutralized without a single shot being fired. "What do you want?" he asked. "To talk," Chen replied simply. "It's been 3,500 years since our species had a proper conversation. I think it's time we caught up. The invasion was over before it had even begun. but somehow Vorthak suspected that the real surprises were just getting started. What followed was not a war in any traditional sense. Wars required two sides capable of fighting each other. What happened instead was a demonstration, a teaching moment that spanned the entire galaxy. Admiral Chen kept her promise about talking. For 6 hours, she and Fleet Admiral Vorthak discussed history, technology, and the future. Vorthak learned more about galactic politics in those 6 hours than he had in 3 centuries of military service. But while they talked, other things were happening throughout the galaxy. On the Viridian homeworld, Defense Minister Corthex was in an emergency meeting when his communication system activated by itself. A human face appeared on his screen, a young woman with kind eyes and a gentle smile. "Hello, Minister Corthex," she said. "My name is Dr. Lisa Park. I've been living on your world for the past 80 years. I run the bakery on 7th Street, near the government district. You buy bread from me every Tuesday." Corthex stared at the screen in shock. He did indeed buy bread from that bakery every Tuesday. The owner was a pleasant Viridian woman named Cassiandra, who made the best grain bread in the city. "I'm afraid I haven't been entirely honest about who I am," Dr. Park continued. "I'm actually a human cultural anthropologist. I've been studying Viridian society as part of a long-term research project." The minister's mouth fell open. You're human, but you look exactly like us." "Biosynthetic camouflage," Dr. Park explained. "One of the technologies we developed during our isolation period. Don't worry, I really do make excellent bread. That part wasn't fake." Similar scenes were playing out across dozens of worlds. Humans who had been living normal lives among alien populations for decades or centuries were revealing their true identities. They weren't spies in the traditional sense. They were researchers, scientists, and cultural observers who had become genuine members of their adopted communities. On the Karathi trade station Nexus Prime, a maintenance worker named Ted Martinez had been fixing gravity generators for over a century. His co-workers knew him as a reliable technician who never missed a shift and always brought extra food to share during break periods. When the revelation began, Ted gathered his work crew in the main break room. He had brought sandwiches as usual. "Listen, everyone," he said in his familiar voice. "I need to tell you something important. I'm actually human." His Karathi supervisor, Vextal, looked confused. "What do you mean, human? You're obviously Karathi. You have scales and 4 arms just like the rest of us." Ted smiled and pressed a small device hidden in his utility belt. His appearance shimmered and changed, revealing a middle-aged human man with graying hair and laugh lines around his eyes. "Sorry about the deception," he said, "but I really have enjoyed working with all of you. You're good people." Vextal stared at him for a long moment, then shook his head in amazement. "Ted, you've been my best worker for 40 years. I don't care if you're human, Karathi, or some kind of space fungus. You still have to finish fixing Generator 7 before your shift ends." Ted laughed. "Already done, boss. It'll run better than ever now." Throughout the galaxy, similar conversations were happening. Humans were revealing themselves not as conquerors or enemies, but as friends and neighbors who had been living quietly among other species for generations. But the cultural revelations were only part of what was happening. On the military front, human capabilities were being demonstrated in ways that defied all previous understanding of warfare. Human ships began appearing throughout the galaxy, not to destroy or conquer, but to disable and contain. The Zeronian Defense Fleet, considered one of the most advanced in the galaxy, found themselves surrounded by human vessels that seemed to phase in and out of reality. The human ships didn't fire weapons. Instead, they projected energy fields that simply turned off the Zeronian ship systems. "This is Admiral Cathresh of the Zeronian Defense Force," the alien commander broadcast. "What do you want?" A human voice responded, calm and professional. "This is Captain Rodriguez of the Earth Defense Fleet. We're here to ensure your ships don't launch any attacks on civilian targets while the current situation is being resolved. Your crews are perfectly safe, but your weapon systems will remain offline until further notice. You can't just disable our entire fleet." "Actually, we can," Captain Rodriguez replied. "Your weapon systems are based on technology that was originally developed by the Bendari Collective about 2,000 years ago. We've been studying Bendari tech for centuries. We know exactly how to make it stop working." Similar scenes played out across the galaxy. Every major military installation found itself visited by human ships that appeared out of nowhere. disabled their defenses without causing casualties, and then politely explained that this was temporary and no one would be harmed. The humans fought like nothing the galaxy had ever seen. They didn't rely on superior firepower or overwhelming numbers. Instead, they used perfect knowledge of their enemy's technology and psychology. Against the Corvani Empire's legendary battle strategists, humans employed tactics that seemed to anticipate every move before it was made. Against the Thanari's advanced AI-controlled fleets, humans used cyber warfare techniques that turned the enemy ship's own computers against them. Most disturbing of all was how the humans coordinated their actions. No matter how far apart they were, human forces acted as if they were all part of a single organism. They shared information instantly across impossible distances and adapted their strategies in real time. Dr. Yanthara, the galaxy's leading expert on military communications, monitored the human fleet activities from her research station. What she observed made no sense according to any known science. "They're not using quantum communications," she reported to her superiors. "They're not using any form of communication we can detect. Yet they coordinate perfectly across light years of space as if they're all connected by some kind of telepathic network." The truth was simpler and more advanced than telepathy. Humans had developed quantum consciousness networking, a technology that allowed individual minds to share thoughts and experiences instantaneously across any distance. Every human in their military forces was connected to a distributed intelligence network that made their collective response time faster than any alien could think. But perhaps the most shocking revelation came from the human treatment of captured enemy personnel. Traditional galactic warfare involved either killing enemies or enslaving them. Humans did neither. When they boarded disabled alien ships, they brought medical teams and food supplies. They treated injured enemy soldiers and shared information about their own technology. They were warriors who acted more like teachers than conquerors. Captain Harrison of the human ship New Dawn boarded a disabled Thanari cruiser to personally speak with its commander. He found the alien crew huddled in their bridge, expecting execution or torture. "I'm Captain Harrison." He introduced himself to the Thanari commander. "I wanted to apologize for disabling your ship so abruptly. Is anyone injured? Do you need medical assistance?" The Thanari commander, Karess, stared at him in confusion. You're apologizing?" "Well, yes. We know this must be very confusing and frightening for you. We want to make sure everyone is okay." Kress had been a military officer for 2 centuries. She had fought in dozens of battles and survived 3 major wars. But she had never encountered enemies who apologized for winning. "What do you want from us?" she asked. "Just to talk," Harrison replied. "We'd like to explain what's happening and why. And we'd like to learn more about your people. We've been studying Thanari culture for years, but there's nothing like meeting face to face." He gestured to his crew, who were distributing food and water to the alien personnel. "We also brought some Earth chocolate. I hope you don't mind, but we're curious if Thanari taste preferences are anything like ours." By the end of the first day, reports were flooding in from across the galaxy. Every major military force had been neutralized. Every planetary defense system had been disabled. Every government communication network had been infiltrated. But instead of the destruction and chaos that usually followed such total military victory, there was a strange sense of calm. The humans weren't destroying anything. They weren't demanding surrender or tribute. They weren't setting up occupation forces or claiming territory. They were just talking to people and asking if anyone wanted to try some chocolate. 3 weeks after the invasion that never happened, the most important meeting in galactic history took place aboard a human space station called Harmony. The station had appeared overnight in neutral space, constructed with technology that made the galaxy's best engineering look primitive. Every major leader from the 7 species of the hegemony was there. Not as prisoners, but as invited guests. They had been transported to the station on human ships that were more comfortable than most luxury hotels. Admiral Chen walked into the main conference room wearing a simple blue uniform with no weapons and no guards. Behind her came a small group of human officials, scientists, and cultural experts. They looked more like teachers attending a school meeting than military officers. After a conquest, the alien leaders sat around a circular table that had been designed to accommodate all 7 species' different physical needs. Ambassador Zethkar was there, along with Fleet Admiral Vorthak, Defense Minister Korthex, and 4 other high-ranking officials from different worlds. Thank you all for coming, Admiral Chen said as she took her seat. I know this situation must be very confusing for you. Emperor Thexmar of the Corvani Empire leaned forward. What do you want from us, human? You have defeated our forces completely. Name your terms for our surrender. Chen looked genuinely surprised. Surrender? No one needs to surrender to anyone. We're here to discuss the future, not to dictate terms. But you have conquered us, insisted Vorthak. You have demonstrated that our military forces are helpless against you. You could destroy any of our worlds whenever you choose. We could, Chen agreed. But why would we want to? We've been studying your civilizations for centuries. You have beautiful art, fascinating cultures, amazing scientific achievements. Destroying any of that would be a terrible waste. She gestured to a holographic display that appeared above the table. It showed images of alien cities, artworks, and cultural festivals. Did you know that Thanari poetry is considered a high art form on 17 different human colonies? Or that Viridian mathematics helped us solve some of our most difficult engineering problems? Dr. Yenthara of the Thanari spoke up. You've been studying our poetry? Oh yes, replied Dr. James Wright, one of the humans at the table. I've been translating Thanari verse for 40 years. The way your language handles emotional concepts is absolutely beautiful. I've always wanted to meet the poets whose work I've been studying. The alien leaders looked at each other in confusion. This was not how conquering species typically behaved. I don't understand, said Minister Corthex. You have the power to rule the galaxy. Your technology surpasses ours in every way, yet you speak of poetry and mathematics. Admiral Chen smiled. Minister, let me ask you a question. What do you think we learned during our 3,500 years in isolation? Advanced military technology, Vorthak answered immediately. Better weapons, added Emperor Thexmar. More efficient ways to destroy your enemies, suggested Zethkar. Chen shook her head. We learned those things, yes, but more importantly, we learned what happens when a species becomes too focused on conquest and domination. She activated another holographic display, this one showing human history. Images of ancient wars, destroyed cities, and environmental damage filled the space above the table. Before we reached the stars, we spent thousands of years fighting each other. We nearly destroyed our own planet several times. We were very good at war, but we were terrible at peace. The display changed to show images of human space colonies, peaceful cities, and cooperation between different human groups. Our isolation gave us time to grow beyond that. We learned that the real measure of a civilization isn't how many worlds it conquers, or how many enemies it destroys. It's how well it takes care of its people and how much beauty it creates. Dr. Wright leaned forward. We spent 3,500 years learning about art, music, literature, philosophy, and science. Not just human versions of these things, but examples from every species in the galaxy. We became students of galactic civilization. But you could rule us all, protested Emperor Thexmar. Why choose cooperation over domination? Because, Chen replied, ruling people by force is exhausting and ultimately pointless. Forced cooperation produces the minimum effort necessary to avoid punishment. Voluntary cooperation produces innovation, creativity, and genuine progress. She stood up and walked around the table. Look at what each of your species has accomplished. The Thanari created poetry that expresses emotions we didn't know existed. The Karathi developed mathematics that let us understand the structure of space-time itself. The Viridians figured out how to grow food in environments that should be completely barren. She paused behind Zethkar's chair. Each of your civilizations has contributed something valuable to galactic knowledge. Why would we want to destroy or suppress any of that? Ambassador Zethkar turned to look at her. But the hegemony has maintained order in this galaxy for thousands of years. Without central authority, there would be chaos. Would there? Chen asked. Or would there be innovation and growth? She returned to her seat and activated a new display. This one showed a proposed map of the galaxy divided not into territories controlled by force, but into zones of cooperation and mutual benefit. We propose something different, Chen announced. Instead of the hegemony of 7 ruling through military force, we suggest the alliance of all, governing through mutual agreement and shared benefit. Dr. Sarah Kim, another human at the table, explained further. Every species would maintain control of their own worlds and systems. But instead of competing for resources and territory, we would share knowledge and technology. Instead of enforcing peace through fear, we would build peace through prosperity. Impossible, scoffed Vorthak. Species naturally compete for resources. Conflict is inevitable. Only when resources are scarce, Dr. Kim replied. But what if they weren't? She activated a holographic display showing advanced manufacturing technology. Human science has solved the problem of scarcity. We can convert any matter into any other matter at the molecular level. We can generate unlimited energy from quantum vacuum fluctuations. We can terraform dead worlds in decades instead of centuries. The alien leaders stared at the displays in amazement. The technology being shown was beyond anything they had imagined possible. We could share these technologies with all galactic civilizations, Chen continued. Imagine a galaxy where no one needs to fight over resources because everyone has enough. Where species can focus on art, science, and exploration instead of war. Minister Cortex leaned back in his chair. And what do you want in return for this? Generosity? Friendship, Chen replied simply. We've been alone for 3,500 years. We'd like to be part of galactic civilization again, but as equals and partners, not as rulers or subjects. Emperor Thexmar shook his head slowly. This is not how the galaxy works. There are always rulers and subjects, conquerors and conquered. It is the natural order. Natural orders can be changed, Dr. Wright said gently. Human society was once based on the same principles. We changed it. We grew beyond it. Admiral Chen stood up again. We're not asking you to accept this proposal immediately. We understand it's a lot to consider. Take time to think about it. Discuss it with your people. We'll keep your military systems offline for now, but only as a safety precaution. We don't want any unfortunate incidents while everyone is adjusting to the new situation. She walked toward the door, then paused. Oh, and we've prepared quarters for all of you here on Harmony. You're welcome to stay as long as you'd like. We thought you might enjoy experiencing some human culture while you consider our proposal. Dr. Kim smiled. We've arranged for cultural exchanges with some of our artists, musicians, and scientists. And the kitchen staff is very excited to cook traditional foods from all of your worlds. As the humans filed out of the conference room, the alien leaders sat in stunned silence. Everything they thought they knew about power, conquest, and galactic politics had been turned upside down in a single conversation. Outside the station's windows, they could see human ships working alongside vessels from their own fleets. The human crews had repaired the alien ships and were now teaching their former enemies how to upgrade their technology. 6 months later, the Soul Accords were signed by representatives of 43 different species. The old hegemony was dissolved and replaced by the Galactic Cooperative Alliance. Trade routes that had been restricted for millennia were opened to all species. Technologies that had been hoarded by ruling elites were shared freely. Admiral Chen, now Coordinator Chen of the Galactic Alliance, stood in her office looking out at the construction of the first joint human-alien research station. Ships from dozens of different worlds worked together, building something that would benefit everyone. Her aide, Lieutenant Parker, entered with a daily report. Coordinator, I have an update on the cultural exchange programs. The Thanari poets are very excited about collaborating with our musicians. Apparently, human rhythm patterns work very well with their verse structures, Chen smiled. And the Viridian mathematicians? Thank you for watching and comment for next part.